Tonight, we embark on a journey into one of the most terrifying and fascinating possibilities our planet has ever faced. The idea that Earth has experienced multiple catastrophic pole shifts throughout its history, and that we may be living on borrowed time before the next one occurs. From classified CIA documents to ancient flood myths found in every culture on Earth, from the mysterious erosion patterns around the Great Sphinx to the buried statues of Easter Island, we find evidence that suggests our planet has been reset multiple times, wiping out advanced civilizations and forcing humanity to start over from the Stone Age. Welcome to Other Worlds, where we explore the mysteries that could reshape everything we think we know about human history and our planet's future. Before we begin this journey together, I'm curious, from what part of the world are you listening tonight? What time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments below, because if the theories we're about to explore are correct, our current civilization may be living in the calm before an unimaginable storm. Tonight, we'll delve into the classified research of Dr. Chan Thomas, whose book The Adam and Eve Story was deemed so dangerous by the CIA that they kept it hidden for over 60 years. We'll examine the evidence for cyclical cataclysms that have repeatedly destroyed advanced civilizations, explore the geological fingerprints left by massive floods that dwarf anything in recorded history, and consider the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization to call Earth home, but perhaps the sixth, or even more. So settle in, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for a journey through time and catastrophe, as we explore what might happen if Earth had multiple pole shifts and what that could mean for our future. In 1966, a former McDonnell Douglas engineer named Dr. Chan Thomas released a book that would change everything we thought we knew about Earth's history and humanity's future. The book was called The Adam and Eve Story, and its contents were so alarming that the CIA immediately classified it, keeping it hidden from the public for over 60 years. When portions of the book were finally declassified, only 57 pages of the original 284-page manuscript were released, and even those pages had been, in the CIA's own words, sanitized. What could possibly be so dangerous about a book written by an engineer that the most powerful intelligence agency in the world felt compelled to hide it from humanity for 6 decades? The answer lies in Dr. Thomas's central thesis, that Earth experiences cyclical pole shifts that create global cataclysms, wiping out nearly all human life and forcing civilization to restart from the Stone Age. According to Thomas, these catastrophic events occur on a regular schedule, and we are currently living in the calm period before the next devastating reset. Dr. Thomas wasn't working in isolation when he developed his theories. His work built upon the research of Charles Hapgood, a Harvard-educated professor who had published Earth's Shifting Crust in 1958, nearly a decade before Thomas's book appeared. Hapgood's theory of crustal displacement suggested that the Earth's outer shell could shift rapidly, rearranging continents and causing massive geological upheavals. At the time, Hapgood's ideas were dismissed as pseudoscience by the mainstream scientific community, but he had some notable supporters, including Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword for 2 of Hapgood's books. What makes this particularly intriguing is that many of Hapgood's pseudoscientific theories have since been proven correct. We now know that continents do move, drifting apart and colliding together over vast periods of time. The theory of continental drift, once ridiculed, is now accepted as fundamental geology. We understand that supercontinents have formed and broken apart repeatedly throughout Earth's history. Pangaea, Gondwana, Rodinia, Columbia, and others stretching back billions of years. Hapgood also proposed that Earth's poles are constantly moving, another idea that was initially dismissed but has since been proven true. Modern science confirms that the magnetic poles do indeed shift over time, and the geographic poles also experience movement, though typically at a much slower rate than what Hapgood and Thomas proposed. The key difference between Hapgood's theories and Thomas's is the time frame. While Hapgood suggested that major crustal shifts could occur over periods of thousands of years, Thomas proposed something far more terrifying, that these catastrophic pole shifts could happen in less than a day, creating a global disaster that would make every Hollywood apocalypse movie look like a gentle spring rain. Dr. Thomas begins his book with a chapter that describes in vivid, horrifying detail exactly what humanity would experience during such a pole shift event. His description reads like the most terrifying disaster scenario ever conceived, and according to Thomas, it's not fiction. It's a preview of our inevitable future. The process begins with a rumble so low as to be inaudible, building into a thundering roar as the most devastating earthquake in human history begins. But this isn't like any earthquake we've ever experienced. In California, mountains shake like ferns in a breeze. The mighty Pacific Ocean rears back and piles up into a mountain of seawater more than 2 miles high, then begins its race eastward at incredible speed. The wind attacks with supersonic force, shredding everything in its path. The mountain of Pacific seawater follows the wind eastward, burying Los Angeles and San Francisco as if they were grains of sand. Across the continent, 1,000-mile-per-hour winds create unholy destruction everywhere, mercilessly obliterating every trace of human civilization. The reason for such violent winds lies in the physics of our rotating planet. Earth spins at approximately 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. We don't feel this rotation because everything, the land, water and atmosphere, spins together in harmony. But Thomas explains that when a pole shift occurs, the Earth's air and water continue to spin at their original speed, while the land masses suddenly stop or change direction. The result is atmospheric and oceanic chaos on an unimaginable scale. In many places, the Earth's molten sublayer breaks through the surface, spreading seas of white-hot liquid fire across the landscape. In a fraction of a day, all vestiges of civilization vanish. The great cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, New York, Boston, become nothing but legends. Barely a stone is left where millions of people walked just hours before. To understand the devastating impact on human life, Thomas asks us to imagine what would happen if we were in a car travelling at 1,000 miles per hour that suddenly stopped. Now imagine what would happen if an entire city moving at that speed suddenly stopped. Skyscrapers would collapse instantly. Millions of people would be thrown around with lethal force. Very few would survive the initial impact, but according to Thomas, the survivors would be the unlucky ones. Moving across the country at the speed of sound comes a wall of water, mud and debris 2 miles high. South America finds that even the towering Andes Mountains are not high enough to stop the violence. In less than a day, entire continents are burned by molten earth fire, buried under miles of violent seas, then transformed into frozen wastelands as temperatures plummet by 180 degrees Fahrenheit. When the shift happens, the land stops moving relative to the sun, which means the sun appears to stop moving in the sky. One side of Earth becomes incredibly hot, while the other side becomes incredibly cold. Even the warmest parts of the planet drop to 80 degrees below zero. Everything, humans, animals, plants and mud, freezes solid within 4 hours. Europe cannot escape the devastation. The Alps and Pyrenees are submerged and then heaved even higher when walls of seawater strike. Western Africa disappears as the sands of the Sahara vanish beneath the fury. The destruction continues for 6 days. During the 6th day, the oceans finally begin to settle into their new positions. According to Thomas's scenario, the Bay of Bengal basin, just east of India, would end up at the North Pole. The Pacific Ocean, just west of Peru, would become the South Pole. New ice caps would begin forming in these new polar areas, while Greenland and Antarctica, now rotating equatorially, would emerge with verdant tropical foliage. Thomas predicts a 90-degree shift in Earth's axis, essentially turning the planet on its side. The poles move to the equator, and the equator moves to the poles. New York lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, covered by unbelievable amounts of mud. Of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas and Boston, not a trace remains. The cataclysm has completed its work, driving the pitiful few survivors into a new Stone Age. In Thomas's vision, we would join the ranks of Noah, Adam and Eve, Atlantis, Lemuria and other legendary figures and civilizations that may have been survivors of previous pole shift catastrophes. Jesus would join Osiris, Thor, Zeus and Vishnu as mythologized memories of pre-cataclysm knowledge and wisdom. This terrifying scenario painted by Dr. Thomas in the first chapter of his book raises the obvious question: how likely is such an event? In the subsequent chapters, Thomas attempts to prove not only that such pole shifts are possible, but that they have happened before and will happen again very soon. In fact, he suggests there are signs that the next catastrophic shift may have already begun. The most compelling evidence for cyclical global catastrophes comes from an unexpected source: the flood myths that appear in virtually every culture on Earth. These aren't just similar stories, They're remarkably consistent accounts of world-ending deluges that destroyed previous civilizations and forced humanity to start over. The Abrahamic religions tell us about Noah's flood, where God decided to cleanse the earth of wickedness and start fresh with a righteous remnant. The Mayans have the Huracan flood, from which we get our word hurricane, describing a storm god who destroyed the world with wind and water. Ancient Hawaiians speak of the Nu flood, where only a few people survived by building a great canoe. The Sumerians, in their Epic of Gilgamesh, describe Utnapishtim surviving a flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. But the flood myths don't stop there. European cultures, Asian civilizations, Pacific Islanders, and Native American tribes from all across the Americas, they all have stories of great floods that cleansed the earth so civilization could begin again. When we find one flood myth, we might dismiss it as folklore. 2 flood myths could be coincidence. But when we find flood myths in over 40 different cultures, many of which had no contact with each other, we begin to see a pattern that looks less like mythology and more like historical memory. In this exploration of ancient mysteries, we typically associate great floods with the end of the last ice age, specifically the Younger Dryas period around 11,500 years ago. Core samples and geological evidence provide solid proof that massive flooding occurred during this time as ice sheets melted and sea levels rose dramatically. However, Dr. Thomas made a startling claim that the most recent Great Flood wasn't 11,500 years ago, but rather 6,500 years ago. In the 1960s, when Thomas was writing, there was very little archaeological evidence to support this more recent date. But in recent decades, archaeologists have made discoveries that seem to validate Thomas's timeline. Evidence of the Guyu flood myth in China has been found, with geological proof of massive flooding occurring between 6,500 and 7,000 years ago. Similar evidence has been discovered in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, all pointing to catastrophic flooding events that occurred more recently than the Younger Dryas, and exactly when Thomas predicted. Dr. Thomas provided specific dates for other major flood events throughout history. According to his research, the Younger Dryas flood occurred about 11,500 years ago. Before that, another major flood happened 18,500 years ago, which corresponds exactly to when the Bering Land Bridge went underwater, cutting off the connection between Asia and North America. Before that, Thomas identified a flood 29,000 years ago, which aligns with the end of the Wisconsin glacial period. And before that, another catastrophic event 43,800 years ago. The pattern Thomas identified suggests that these catastrophic events occur on a roughly cyclical basis, with major pole shifts and associated floods happening approximately every 11,500 to 18,000 years. If this pattern holds true, and if the most recent major event was indeed 6,500 years ago, then we may be approaching the time window for the next catastrophic shift. While global floods are not controversial, we know they have happened throughout Earth's history. What is controversial is Thomas's claim that advanced civilizations existed before each of these floods. Mainstream archaeology and paleontology maintain that the first true civilization emerged in Mesopotamia around 6,500 years ago. But what if that wasn't the beginning of human civilization, but rather just the most recent reboot? The evidence for pre-flood civilizations can be found in some of the world's most famous monuments. When we examine the erosion patterns around the base of the Great Sphinx in Egypt, we see clear evidence of water damage, vast amounts of water moving at tremendous speeds. If this is indeed water erosion, it means the Sphinx was created before the last major flood, which would place its construction before the emergence of the Egyptian civilization as we understand it. Archaeologists have long resisted the idea that the Sphinx could be older than conventional Egyptian chronology suggests, but the geological evidence is difficult to ignore. The erosion patterns are consistent with the kind of damage that would be caused by massive flooding, not the gradual weathering we would expect from thousands of years of wind and sand. The implications of an older Sphinx are staggering. If the monument was indeed built before the last Great Flood, it suggests that an advanced civilization capable of massive construction projects existed in Egypt thousands of years before the pharaohs. This civilization would have possessed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, knowledge that was supposedly lost and had to be rediscovered by later cultures. but the Sphinx is not the only evidence of pre-flood civilizations. Around the world, we find megalithic structures that seem to defy explanation, given our understanding of ancient technological capabilities. From the precisely cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia to the massive blocks of Baalbek in Lebanon, from the underwater structures off the coast of Japan to the mysterious stone circles of Turkey, we see evidence of construction techniques and astronomical knowledge that challenges our assumptions about ancient human capabilities. These structures share several common characteristics that suggest they may be remnants of pre-flood civilizations. They are built with massive stone blocks that would be difficult to move and position even with modern equipment. They demonstrate precise astronomical alignments that indicate sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics, and many of them show evidence of having been damaged by massive flooding or other catastrophic events. The precision of these ancient constructions is particularly puzzling. At Pumapunku, for example, we find stone blocks cut with such accuracy that they fit together without mortar, with tolerances that would challenge modern machinery. The blocks are made of andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, yet they have been shaped with perfect right angles, smooth surfaces, and intricate interlocking designs. Similarly, at Baalbek in Lebanon, we find the largest worked stone blocks in the world, some weighing over 800 tons. These massive stones were not only quarried and shaped with incredible precision, but were also transported and lifted into position in a structure that has survived for thousands of years. The engineering required for such a feat suggests a level of technological sophistication that mainstream archaeology attributes to much later periods. The astronomical alignments found at these sites are equally impressive. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years, demonstrates sophisticated knowledge of stellar positions and celestial cycles. The site's massive T-shaped pillars are aligned with specific constellations, and the complex appears to have been designed as a kind of ancient observatory. Easter Island provides another intriguing piece of the puzzle. The famous Moai statues, which most people think of as just heads, actually have full bodies that extend deep underground. This raises two possibilities. Either the builders first dug enormous holes, placed 30-foot-tall, 80-ton statues in them up to their necks, and then filled in the holes, or the statues were originally completely above ground but were later buried by some catastrophic event. Given the evidence for massive flooding and geological upheaval throughout Earth's history, the second explanation seems more plausible. The buried bodies of the Moai statues may be evidence of the kind of catastrophic mud floods that Dr. Thomas describes in his pole shift scenarios. The location of Easter Island itself is puzzling. It's a tiny, isolated island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, yet at one point it supported a population of 12,000 people. Mainstream anthropology suggests that Polynesian voyagers took canoes thousands of miles across open ocean and somehow found this tiny speck of land. While Polynesian navigation skills were indeed remarkable, the idea of deliberately sailing to such a remote location seems unlikely, unless the navigators knew it was there. However, if the continent of Lemuria or Mu was real, a vast landmass in the Pacific that connected various island chains, then the ancestors of Easter Island's inhabitants could have simply walked there. This would also explain some of the linguistic and cultural similarities between Polynesian cultures and civilizations on the other side of the Pacific. The connections between distant cultures are indeed striking. Polynesian languages share similarities with Greek, and on Easter Island they worshipped a sun god called Ra, which is remarkably similar to the Egyptian sun god Ra. These similarities suggest either direct contact between these cultures or a common source, perhaps a global civilization that existed before the last catastrophic pole shift. The evidence for cyclical catastrophes becomes even more compelling when we examine the legends and geological evidence for lost continents that may have been destroyed in previous pole shifts. Two of the most famous of these lost lands are Atlantis and Lemuria, also known as Mu, both of which are described in ancient texts as advanced civilizations that were destroyed in global cataclysms. Atlantis, first described by the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, has captured human imagination for over 2,000 years. According to Plato, Atlantis was an advanced island civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, making it approximately 11,500 years old, exactly the time frame that Dr. Thomas associates with the last major pole shift and flood event. Plato described Atlantis as a sophisticated society with advanced technology, impressive architecture, and a powerful military. The civilization was arranged in concentric rings of land and water, with a central island connected to the outer rings by bridges and waterways. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods, sinking beneath the ocean and disappearing forever. While many scholars consider Atlantis to be a philosophical allegory rather than a historical account, the specific details Plato provides and the consistency of his description across multiple dialogues suggest he may have been drawing from actual historical sources. Plato claimed that the story of Atlantis came from Egyptian priests who had preserved the account in their temple records, suggesting that the tale may have been based on real events passed down through oral tradition. One of the most intriguing potential locations for Atlantis is the reshape structure in northwest Africa, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. This massive geological formation is roughly circular, with concentric rings that match Plato's description of Atlantis. The structure is about the right size and shape for the lost continent, and it features what appears to be a waterway flowing outward from the centre. The debate continues over whether the reshape structure is a natural geological formation or the remnants of an ancient civilization. Some researchers point to what appear to be artificial modifications to the landscape, while others argue that the concentric rings are the result of natural erosion and geological processes. However, what's particularly fascinating about the area around the Eye of the Sahara is the presence of massive ripple patterns in the landscape that suggest catastrophic flooding. These ripples, visible from aerial photography, are enormous, about 50 feet high and stretching for miles across the landscape. They look like rolling hills from ground level, but from above, they clearly show the characteristic patterns of massive water flow. These formations are the size of 5-story buildings and could only have been created by unimaginable amounts of water moving at tremendous speed across the landscape. Similar ripple patterns can be found in various locations around the world, all suggesting that massive floods have swept across continents at various times in Earth's history. These geological fingerprints provide physical evidence for the kind of catastrophic flooding that Dr. Thomas describes in his pole shift scenarios. To visualize the scale of water required to create such formations, we need to think in terms of tsunamis that are over 1,000 feet deep, sweeping across continents at speeds of 200 to 300 million cubic feet per second. This is an almost inconceivable amount of water, far exceeding anything in recorded human history. On the other side of the world from the potential Atlantis site, we find evidence for another lost continent, Lemuria, also known as Mu. This legendary landmass was described by Augustus Le Plongeon and later by James Churchward, both of whom claim to have translated ancient texts from Maya and Indian sources that described a vast continent in the Pacific Ocean. According to these accounts, Lemuria stretched from Hawaii in the north to Easter Island in the south, and extended so far west that it almost reached the islands of Japan. Both Mayan and Indian cultures, despite being on opposite sides of the world, describe this Pacific continent and its eventual destruction in a cataclysm that occurred approximately 11,500 years ago. Once again, the same time frame associated with the Younger Dryas and Dr. Thomas's pole shift cycle. The Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan is often cited as potential evidence for the underwater ruins of Lemuria. This massive stone structure, discovered by divers in the 1980s, features what appear to be artificial terraces, steps, and geometric shapes that suggest human construction. While some geologists argue that the formation is entirely natural, others point to features that seem too regular and purposeful to be the result of natural erosion. Nan Madol in Micronesia is considered by some researchers to be part of the southern region of the lost continent of Mu. This remarkable site consists of nearly 100 artificial islands connected by a network of canals, all constructed from enormous logs of volcanic rock. The engineering required to build Nan Madol is impressive even by modern standards, yet we have no idea who built it or how they managed to transport and position the massive stone logs. Recent aerial imaging has revealed that Nan Madol once had a sophisticated artificial irrigation system that could bring fresh water to residents throughout the complex. This suggests a level of urban planning and engineering that indicates an advanced civilization, yet the site predates any known Pacific culture capable of such construction. The eastern part of the hypothetical continent of Mu is represented by Easter Island with its famous Moai statues. As we discussed earlier, These statues have full bodies buried deep underground, suggesting either an inexplicable construction method or burial by some catastrophic event. The island's isolation in the vast Pacific Ocean raises questions about how its original inhabitants arrived there and how they managed to support a population of 12,000 people on such a small, remote land mass. If the continent of Mu was real, it would explain many puzzling aspects of Pacific cultures. The similarities between Polynesian languages and distant cultures like Greek become more understandable if there was once a land bridge or large continent connecting these regions. The worship of similar sun gods across vast distances makes more sense if these cultures shared a common origin on a now sunken continent. The linguistic and cultural connections extend beyond the Pacific. There are striking similarities between Greek, Egyptian and Indian mythologies, as if all these cultures either intermingled directly or derived from a single source. The gods and goddesses of these distant civilizations often share similar attributes, stories, and even names, suggesting either extensive ancient contact or a common ancestral culture. Dr. Thomas's theory of cyclical pole shifts provides a framework for understanding how such advanced civilizations could have existed and then vanished, leaving only fragments of their knowledge and culture to be preserved in the myths and legends of survivor populations. Each catastrophic event would destroy the physical infrastructure of these civilizations, while scattering small groups of survivors to distant lands where they would gradually rebuild and pass down distorted memories of their lost homeland. The geological evidence for massive flooding, the archaeological anomalies that suggest advanced ancient civilizations, and the consistent flood myths found in cultures around the world all point toward the possibility that Dr. Thomas was correct about the cyclical nature of global catastrophes. If his theory is accurate, then Atlantis, Lemuria and other lost civilizations weren't mythical utopias, but real societies that fell victim to the same kind of pole shift catastrophe that may await our own civilization. To understand how such devastating pole shifts could occur, we need to examine Dr. Thomas's explanation of the physical processes that drive these catastrophic events. His theory, while controversial, is based on the geological structure of our planet and the complex interactions between Earth's magnetic field, its molten interior, and the massive ice caps that sit at the poles. Dr. Thomas included a detailed cross-section diagram of Earth in his book showing the various layers that make up our planet's interior. According to his analysis, there are two crucial molten layers within the Earth that play key roles in the pole shift process. The first is a thin molten layer starting about 60 miles below the surface and extending down to 120 miles deep. The second is a much thicker molten layer beginning 1,800 miles down at the bottom of the mantle and extending 1,300 miles deeper toward the core. Modern seismology has confirmed that these layers are indeed molten and incredibly hot, over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Under normal conditions, the electrical and magnetic structure of Earth's interior keeps these molten layers acting as if they were nearly solid, maintaining the planet's stable rotation on its axis. However, according to Thomas's theory, every few thousand years, the magnetic and electrical orderliness in the shallow molten layer becomes disorganized to such an extent that this layer begins to act as a free liquid. When this happens, the molten layer serves as a lubricant that allows the ice caps to pull the Earth's outer shell around the planet's interior, causing the ice caps to shift approximately 90 degrees into the torrid zone. The trigger for this process appears to be related to the massive weight of the polar ice caps and their interaction with Earth's magnetic field. As the ice caps grow and shift over time, they create an imbalance that puts stress on the planet's rotational stability. When the magnetic field weakens or becomes disorganized, as it periodically does throughout Earth's history, the molten layer beneath the crust can no longer maintain its solid-like behavior. When this critical point is reached, the process unfolds with terrifying speed. In Thomas's scenario, the layer beneath Earth's crust turns from solid to liquid, allowing the land masses to slide around freely. The enormous weight of the ice caps then yanks the Earth off its axis in a quarter to a half day, causing the geographic poles to move to the torrid zone while all hell lets loose. The key to understanding the devastating effects of such a shift lies in the fact that the atmosphere and oceans don't shift with the solid shell of the Earth. They continue rotating west to east at their original speed, which at the equator is about 1,037 miles per hour. So while the shell shifts with the poles moving to the equator, the winds and oceans continue eastward, creating the catastrophic conditions that Thomas describes. This differential motion between the solid Earth and its fluid envelope creates winds of unimaginable violence and ocean movements that dwarf any tsunami in recorded history. The atmosphere, suddenly moving at supersonic speeds relative to the land surface, would create winds capable of levelling mountains and scouring the landscape clean of all vegetation and structures. Similarly, the oceans would become massive walls of water, moving across continents at speeds that would make them unstoppable, forces of destruction. These wouldn't be ordinary tsunamis, which are typically caused by underwater earthquakes or landslides, but rather the entire ocean system continuing its rotational motion while the land beneath it suddenly changes direction. The geological evidence for such catastrophic events can be found in the massive ripple formations we discussed earlier, as well as in the widespread distribution of marine fossils at high elevations around the world. These fossils, found thousands of feet above current sea level and hundreds of miles from any ocean, suggest that massive bodies of water have indeed swept across continents at various times in Earth's history. The temperature effects of a pole shift would be equally devastating. When the land stops moving relative to the sun, one side of Earth would experience continuous daylight, while the other side would be plunged into continuous darkness. The temperature differential would be extreme, with the dark side experiencing rapid cooling while the light side would heat up dramatically. Thomas calculated that temperatures could drop by as much as 180 degrees Fahrenheit in the areas that suddenly found themselves in polar regions. This means that even the warmest parts of the newly polar regions would drop to 80 degrees below zero. Everything, humans, animals, plants, and even the mud and debris left by the flooding, would freeze solid within hours. This rapid freezing could explain some of the puzzling discoveries of perfectly preserved mammoth carcasses in Siberia, found with tropical vegetation still in their stomachs. If these animals were living in a temperate or tropical climate that was suddenly shifted to a polar region during a catastrophic pole shift, they would have been flash frozen before they could even digest their last meal. The process Thomas describes would also explain the formation of new ice caps in the areas that become the new poles, while the old polar regions, now moved to equatorial positions, would rapidly warm and develop tropical climates. This could account for the evidence of tropical fossils found in Antarctica and the Arctic, suggesting that these regions were once much warmer than they are today. The duration of the catastrophic phase, according to Thomas, would be approximately 6 days. During this time, the oceans would gradually settle into their new positions relative to the shifted land masses, and the atmosphere would eventually synchronize with the new rotational pattern of the Earth's surface. However, the damage to human civilization would be complete long before the planet settled into its new configuration. The few survivors of such a catastrophe would find themselves in a world that had been completely transformed. Familiar coastlines would be gone, mountain ranges would be in different locations, and the climate patterns they had known would be entirely changed. With all infrastructure destroyed and most of the population eliminated, the survivors would be forced to restart human civilization from the most basic level. This scenario provides a framework for understanding how advanced civilizations could repeatedly rise and fall throughout human history. Each cycle would begin with survivors possessing fragments of knowledge from the previous civilization, but lacking the infrastructure and population necessary to maintain advanced technology. Over thousands of years, these survivor populations would gradually rebuild, rediscover lost knowledge, and eventually develop into new advanced civilizations, only to be destroyed by the next pole shift event. The cyclical nature of these catastrophes could explain many of the mysteries we find in ancient cultures, their sophisticated astronomical knowledge, their massive construction projects that seem to exceed their supposed technological capabilities, and their consistent flood myths that describe the destruction of previous worlds. These cultures may have been the inheritors of knowledge from previous civilizations, working to rebuild and preserve what they could before the next inevitable catastrophe. Understanding when the next catastrophic pole shift might occur requires examining the historical pattern that Dr. Thomas identified and looking for signs that such an event may be approaching. According to Thomas's research, these catastrophic events follow a roughly cyclical pattern, with major pole shifts occurring approximately every 11,500 to 18,000 years. The most recent major event, according to Thomas, occurred around 6,500 years ago, which corresponds to the emergence of the earliest known civilizations in Mesopotamia. This timing is significant because it suggests that what we consider the beginning of human civilization may actually be the most recent restart following a global catastrophe. Working backward from this date, Thomas identified several previous catastrophic events. The Younger Dryas event, approximately 11,500 years ago, marked the end of the last ice age and involved massive flooding, as ice sheets melted and sea levels rose dramatically. Before that, another major event occurred around 18,500 years ago, which corresponds to when the Bering Land Bridge was submerged, cutting off the connection between Asia and North America. Going further back, Thomas identified catastrophic events at approximately 29,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the Wisconsin glacial period, and another at 43,800 years ago. This pattern suggests that major pole shifts and associated global catastrophes occur on a cycle of roughly 11,500 to 18,000 years, with some variation in the timing. If this pattern holds true, and if the most recent major event was indeed 6,500 years ago, then we may be approaching the time window for the next catastrophic shift. Depending on whether the cycle follows the shorter or longer interval, the next event could occur anywhere from 5,000 to 11,500 years from now. However, Thomas suggested that there are signs indicating the process may have already begun. One of the most significant indicators that a pole shift may be approaching is the behavior of Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic poles are constantly moving, and the rate of this movement has been accelerating in recent decades. The magnetic North Pole, which was located in northern Canada for centuries, has been moving towards Siberia at an increasing rate, travelling over 40 miles per year in recent measurements. Even more concerning is the overall weakening of Earth's magnetic field. Scientific measurements show that the magnetic field has been declining in strength for the past 150 years, with the rate of decline accelerating in recent decades. Some scientists estimate that if this trend continues, Earth's magnetic field could collapse entirely within the next few centuries. A weakening or collapsing magnetic field is significant because, according to Thomas's theory, the magnetic field plays a crucial role in maintaining the stability of the molten layers beneath Earth's crust. When the magnetic field becomes disorganized or weakened, it can no longer keep the shallow molten layer acting as a solid, potentially triggering the catastrophic process that leads to a pole shift. There are also geological indicators that suggest increased instability in Earth systems. Volcanic activity has been increasing in various parts of the world, and seismic activity appears to be more frequent and intense than in previous decades. While these could be normal variations in geological activity, they could also be early signs of the kind of instability that precedes a major pole shift event. Climate change, regardless of its causes, may also play a role in destabilizing the polar ice caps. As ice melts and reforms in different patterns, it changes the distribution of weight on Earth's surface, potentially affecting the planet's rotational balance. Large-scale changes in ice distribution could contribute to the kind of imbalance that Thomas suggests triggers catastrophic pole shifts. The behavior of animals has also been noted as a potential indicator of approaching geological instability. Throughout history, animals have demonstrated an ability to sense impending earthquakes and other geological events before humans become aware of them. Reports of unusual animal behavior, mass migrations, and changes in migratory patterns could potentially be early warning signs of larger geological changes. However, it's important to note that predicting the exact timing of a catastrophic pole shift, if such events do occur, is extremely difficult. The geological and magnetic processes involved operate on timescales that are vast compared to human lifespans, and there are many variables that could affect the timing and severity of such events. Thomas himself was cautious about making specific predictions regarding timing, focusing instead on the evidence that such events have occurred in the past and will likely occur again in the future. His primary concern was not necessarily when the next catastrophe would happen, but rather that humanity should be aware of the possibility and perhaps take steps to preserve knowledge and civilization for future generations. The implications of Thomas's timeline are sobering. If his theory is correct, then our current technological civilization exists during a relatively brief interglacial period between catastrophic events. All of our cities, infrastructure, and accumulated knowledge could be wiped out in a matter of days, forcing the survivors to restart human civilization from the most basic level. This perspective puts many aspects of human history and culture in a different light. The emphasis on preserving knowledge in various forms, from written records to oral traditions to symbolic representations in art and architecture, takes on new significance if we consider that previous civilizations may have been trying to preserve their knowledge for post-catastrophe survivors. The massive stone monuments found around the world, with their sophisticated astronomical, alignments and mathematical relationships, may have been designed not just as religious or ceremonial sites, but as repositories of crucial information that could survive catastrophic events. The precision and durability of these structures suggest that their builders understood the importance of creating records that could withstand the kind of destruction that Thomas describes. Similarly, the flood myths found in cultures around the world may not be just religious allegories, but actual historical memories passed down from survivors of previous catastrophic events. These stories may contain important information about the nature of these catastrophes and how small groups of humans managed to survive and rebuild. If Thomas's theory is accurate, then we are living in what might be called the calm before the storm, a period of relative stability that allows civilization to flourish, but which is ultimately temporary. This doesn't necessarily mean that a catastrophic pole shift is imminent, but it does suggest that such an event is inevitable on geological timescales. The question then becomes, what, if anything, can be done to prepare for such an eventuality? Thomas himself seemed to believe that the catastrophic nature of pole shifts makes them essentially unsurvivable for most of the human population. However, he also suggested that understanding these cycles might allow future civilizations to better preserve knowledge and perhaps develop technologies that could help humanity survive or even prevent such catastrophes. As we examine the current state of our planet through the lens of Dr. Thomas's pole shift theory, several concerning trends emerge that could be interpreted as early warning signs of an approaching catastrophic event. While these phenomena have various conventional explanations, their combination and increasing intensity raise questions about whether we might be witnessing the early stages of the process that Thomas described. The most significant and measurable change is the accelerating movement and weakening of Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic North Pole has been moving at an unprecedented rate, travelling from northern Canada towards Siberia at speeds that have increased from about 9 miles per year in the early 1900s to over 40 miles per year in recent measurements. This acceleration is far beyond normal magnetic pole wandering and suggests that something fundamental is changing in Earth's magnetic system. Equally concerning is the overall weakening of the magnetic field strength. Scientific measurements indicate that Earth's magnetic field has lost approximately 10% of its strength over the past 150 years, with the rate of decline accelerating in recent decades. In some regions, particularly over the South Atlantic, the magnetic field has weakened by as much as 20%, creating what scientists call the South Atlantic anomaly. This weakening is significant because Earth's magnetic field serves as a shield against cosmic radiation and solar particles. As the field weakens, more radiation reaches Earth's surface, potentially affecting everything from satellite communications to biological systems. More importantly, in the context of Thomas's theory, a weakening magnetic field could be the precursor to the kind of magnetic instability that triggers catastrophic pole shifts. The magnetic field reversals that have occurred throughout Earth's history provide additional context for these current changes. Geological evidence shows that Earth's magnetic poles have reversed many times, with the north and south magnetic poles essentially switching places. These reversals typically occur every 200,000 to 300,000 years, but the last reversal happened approximately 780,000 years ago, meaning we are overdue for such an event by geological standards. During magnetic reversals, the magnetic field doesn't simply flip overnight. Instead, it goes through a period of instability where the field strength drops dramatically, and multiple magnetic poles may appear in various locations around the planet. This period of magnetic chaos could last anywhere from hundreds to thousands of years, during which Earth would be largely unprotected from cosmic radiation. While magnetic reversals are natural phenomena that have occurred throughout Earth's history, Thomas's theory suggests that they may be connected to the catastrophic pole shifts that destroy civilizations. The timing of magnetic instability could coincide with the physical shifting of Earth's crust, creating the perfect storm of conditions that leads to global catastrophe. Geological activity around the world also shows signs of increasing intensity. Volcanic eruptions have become more frequent and powerful in recent decades, with major eruptions occurring in locations that had been dormant for centuries. The Ring of Fire around the Pacific Ocean has been particularly active, with increased volcanic and seismic activity from Alaska to Chile to Indonesia. Earthquake activity has also intensified, with more frequent and powerful earthquakes occurring in various parts of the world. While some of this increase may be due to better detection and reporting systems, the overall trend suggests that geological stresses are building within Earth's crust. Large-scale earthquake swarms, where hundreds or thousands of smaller earthquakes occur in a relatively short period, have become more common in various locations. The behaviour of Earth's rotation itself has shown subtle but measurable changes. The length of a day varies slightly due to various factors, including the distribution of mass on Earth's surface, atmospheric conditions, and the movement of molten material in the core. Recent measurements have detected small but consistent changes in Earth's rotation rate, which could indicate shifts in the planet's internal dynamics. Climate patterns around the world have also become increasingly unstable and unpredictable. While climate change is typically attributed to human activities, the rapid pace and extreme nature of some recent changes suggest that other factors may be involved. Sudden shifts in ocean currents, unexpected changes in atmospheric circulation patterns, and extreme weather events that break historical records could all be symptoms of larger instabilities in Earth's systems. The behaviour of animals has provided another source of concern for those monitoring potential signs of geological instability. Mass die-offs of marine life, unusual migration patterns, and reports of animals exhibiting strange behaviour have increased in frequency. While these events often have specific local causes, their global pattern and increasing frequency could indicate that animals are sensing changes in Earth's magnetic field or other environmental factors that humans cannot directly perceive. Satellite and GPS systems have experienced increasing numbers of anomalies and failures, particularly in regions where the magnetic field is weakest. These technological disruptions could be early indicators of the kind of magnetic instability that Thomas associated with approaching pole shifts. As our civilization becomes increasingly dependent on satellite-based technologies, these disruptions could serve as an early warning system for larger magnetic field changes. The polar ice caps themselves have shown dramatic changes in recent decades. While much of this change is attributed to global warming, the rapid pace of ice loss and the unpredictable patterns of ice formation and melting could also be related to changes in Earth's magnetic field or rotational dynamics. Large-scale changes in ice distribution affect the planet's moment of inertia and could contribute to rotational instabilities. Ocean currents, which play a crucial role in global climate regulation, have shown signs of significant change. The Gulf Stream, which brings warm water from the Caribbean to the North Atlantic, has shown signs of weakening and shifting. Similar changes have been observed in other major ocean currents around the world. These changes could be related to magnetic field effects on the movement of electrically conductive seawater, or they could be early signs of the kind of oceanic reorganization that would occur during a pole shift. Space weather has also become more intense and unpredictable. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections from the Sun have increased in frequency and intensity, and their effects on Earth have become more pronounced as our magnetic field weakens. These space weather events can disrupt satellite communications, GPS systems, and even electrical grids on Earth's surface. The increasing frequency of unusual astronomical events has also caught the attention of researchers. Meteor showers have become more intense, and there have been more reports of unusual atmospheric phenomena. While these events may be unrelated to pole shift processes, they could indicate that Earth is passing through regions of space with different characteristics, potentially affecting the planet's magnetic environment. Perhaps most concerning is the apparent acceleration of all these processes. Changes that might normally occur over centuries or millennia seem to be happening over decades or years. This acceleration could indicate that we are approaching a critical threshold where small changes trigger much larger and more rapid transformations. However, it's important to note that correlation does not necessarily imply causation, and many of these phenomena have conventional explanations that don't require invoking catastrophic pole shift theories. Climate change, increased geological monitoring, and natural variations in Earth systems could account for many of the observed changes without requiring a catastrophic explanation. Nevertheless, the combination and acceleration of these various phenomena create a pattern that is consistent with Thomas's description of the early stages of a pole shift process. Whether these signs indicate an approaching catastrophe or simply represent normal variations in Earth's complex systems remains to be seen, but they certainly warrant careful monitoring and study. The challenge for modern civilization is determining how to respond to these potential warning signs. If Thomas's theory is correct, then no amount of preparation could prevent the catastrophic effects of a major pole shift. However, understanding these processes might allow us to better preserve knowledge and perhaps develop technologies that could help some portion of humanity survive such an event. If Dr. Thomas's theory of cyclical catastrophes is correct, then the most profound question becomes, how do small groups of humans survive these global cataclysms, and how do they manage to rebuild civilization from the ashes of the previous world? The answer to this question may lie in understanding not just the physical survival strategies, but also the methods by which crucial knowledge is preserved and transmitted across the catastrophic divide. The survival of any humans during a catastrophic pole shift would depend largely on location, preparation, and sheer luck. According to Thomas's scenario, the areas most likely to survive relatively intact would be those that end up in temperate zones after the shift, away from the paths of the massive tsunamis and far from the zones of extreme temperature change. High-altitude locations, particularly those with natural shelter and access to fresh water, would offer the best chances for survival. Underground facilities, whether natural caves or artificial structures, could provide protection from the initial catastrophic winds and temperature extremes. Some researchers have suggested that the extensive underground tunnel systems found at various ancient sites around the world may have been built specifically as survival shelters for catastrophic events. The underground cities of Cappadocia in Turkey, for example, could house thousands of people for extended periods and may represent the kind of preparation that previous civilizations made for anticipated catastrophes. The survivors would face enormous challenges in the immediate aftermath of a pole shift. With all infrastructure destroyed and the landscape completely transformed, they would need to quickly establish sources of food, water, and shelter in an environment that might be completely unfamiliar. The climate in their location could be entirely different from what it was before the shift, requiring rapid adaptation to new conditions. Perhaps most importantly, the survivors would need to preserve and transmit the knowledge necessary to rebuild civilization. This presents a unique challenge because the most advanced knowledge of any civilization is typically stored in forms that are vulnerable to catastrophic destruction. Books, computers, databases, and other information storage systems that would be wiped out in a global catastrophe. Ancient civilizations seem to have understood this challenge and developed various strategies for preserving crucial information across catastrophic events. The massive stone monuments found around the world, with their sophisticated astronomical alignments and mathematical relationships, may have served as repositories of essential knowledge encoded in forms that could survive almost any disaster. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, contains mathematical relationships that encode fundamental constants like pi and the golden ratio, as well as astronomical information about Earth's dimensions and its relationship to other celestial bodies. This information is preserved in the physical structure of the monument itself, making it virtually indestructible and ensuring that future civilizations could rediscover this knowledge by studying the monument's proportions and alignments. Similarly, sites like Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, and other megalithic structures around the world appear to encode astronomical and mathematical information in their design. These monuments could serve as libraries of stone, preserving crucial knowledge in a form that could survive the kind of catastrophic destruction that Thomas describes. Oral traditions also play a crucial role in preserving knowledge across catastrophic divides. The flood myths found in cultures around the world may not just be religious stories, but actual historical accounts passed down from survivors of previous catastrophes. These stories often contain practical information about survival strategies, astronomical knowledge, and warnings about future catastrophic events. The consistency of these flood myths across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests that they may be based on real historical events. The details preserved in these stories, the duration of the flooding, the methods used to survive, the signs that preceded the catastrophe, could represent crucial survival information passed down from actual survivors of previous pole shifts. Religious and mythological systems may also serve as vehicles for preserving advanced knowledge in symbolic form. The complex mythologies of ancient cultures often contain sophisticated astronomical and mathematical concepts disguised as stories about gods and heroes. These symbolic systems could preserve advanced knowledge in a form that would be memorable and transmissible, even when the original scientific understanding was lost. The process of rebuilding civilization after a catastrophic event would likely follow a predictable pattern. The immediate survivors would focus on basic survival, finding food, water, and shelter in the transformed landscape. Over generations, as populations grew and stabilized, they would begin to rediscover and develop technologies, starting with the most basic tools and gradually working toward more advanced capabilities. However, the survivors would not be starting completely from scratch. They would carry with them fragments of knowledge from the previous civilization, stories, techniques, and concepts that had been preserved through the catastrophe. This inherited knowledge would give them significant advantages over a truly primitive society, allowing them to rediscover advanced concepts more quickly than would otherwise be possible. This could explain some of the puzzling aspects of ancient civilizations that seem to appear suddenly with sophisticated knowledge and capabilities. Rather than developing gradually from primitive beginnings, these civilizations may have been rebuilding based on inherited knowledge from previous catastrophic cycles. The astronomical knowledge demonstrated by ancient cultures, for example, often seems far more advanced than their supposed technological capabilities would suggest. If these cultures were inheriting astronomical information from previous civilizations, preserved in oral traditions and stone monuments, they could have possessed sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics without having to rediscover it through centuries of observation and calculation. The mathematical precision found in ancient monuments could also be explained by inherited knowledge. The builders of these structures may not have independently developed the mathematical concepts they employed, but rather inherited them from previous civilizations and applied them to their own construction projects. Over time, as civilizations rebuilt and advanced, they would face the same challenge that confronted their predecessors: how to preserve their knowledge for the survivors of the next catastrophic cycle. This could explain the emphasis on massive, durable construction projects in many ancient cultures. These civilizations may have understood that they were living in a temporary period between catastrophes, and that their primary responsibility was to preserve as much knowledge as possible for future generations. The cyclical nature of this process could also explain some of the similarities found between distant cultures. If all human civilizations are ultimately descended from survivors of previous catastrophic cycles, and if they all inherit fragments of knowledge from the same pre-catastrophe sources, then we would expect to find common elements in their mythologies, technologies, and cultural practices. This perspective suggests that human civilization is not a linear progression from primitive to advanced, but rather a cyclical process of rise, destruction, and rebuilding. Each cycle builds upon the preserved knowledge of previous cycles, but also faces the same ultimate fate of catastrophic destruction. The implications of this cyclical view of civilization are profound. It suggests that our current technological civilization, despite its apparent sophistication, may be just the latest iteration in a long series of advanced societies that have risen and fallen throughout human history. Our cities, technologies, and accumulated knowledge may all be temporary achievements that will eventually be swept away by the next catastrophic cycle. However, this perspective also offers hope. If previous civilizations have managed to preserve crucial knowledge across catastrophic divides, then it may be possible for our civilization to do the same. By understanding the methods used by previous cultures to preserve knowledge, and by developing new technologies for information storage and transmission, we might be able to ensure that future post-catastrophe civilizations have access to more complete knowledge than any previous cycle. The key insight from Thomas's theory is that survival and rebuilding are possible, even after the most catastrophic events. Humans have apparently survived multiple global catastrophes and have repeatedly rebuilt advanced civilizations from the ruins of the previous world. This resilience suggests that even if catastrophic pole shifts are inevitable, they are not necessarily the end of human civilization, but rather transitions between different phases of human development. As we consider Dr. Thomas's theory of cyclical catastrophes in the context of our modern technological civilization, we face unprecedented challenges and opportunities that previous civilizations never encountered. Our current level of technological development, global interconnectedness, and dependence on complex systems creates both vulnerabilities and potential advantages that could fundamentally change how humanity might survive and rebuild after a catastrophic pole shift. Our modern civilization is more vulnerable to catastrophic disruption than any previous society in human history. We depend on intricate networks of electrical power, telecommunications, transportation, and supply chains that span the globe. A catastrophic pole shift would not only destroy physical infrastructure, but would also eliminate the complex logistical systems that keep our civilization functioning. The loss of electrical power alone would cripple virtually every aspect of modern life, from food production and distribution to medical care and communication. The concentration of human population in massive urban centres creates additional vulnerabilities. Unlike previous civilizations where most people lived in rural areas and possessed basic survival skills, the majority of modern humans live in urban areas and possess advanced survival skills cities and depend entirely on complex systems for their basic needs. Most people today lack the knowledge and skills necessary to produce food, purify water, or create shelter without modern technology and infrastructure. Our dependence on just-in-time supply chains means that most urban areas have only a few days' worth of food and essential supplies available at any given time. In a catastrophic scenario, the breakdown of transportation and communication systems would quickly lead to shortages of everything from food and medicine to fuel and basic tools. The social disruption caused by these shortages could be as devastating as the physical effects of the catastrophe itself. However, our modern technological capabilities also offer unprecedented opportunities for survival and knowledge preservation. For the first time in human history, we have the ability to store vast amounts of information in compact, durable forms. Digital storage systems, while vulnerable to electromagnetic disruption, could potentially preserve the entire accumulated knowledge of human civilization in devices small enough to be easily transported and protected. More importantly, we have the capability to create multiple redundant copies of crucial information and distribute them globally. Unlike previous civilizations that had to rely on a few stone monuments or oral traditions to preserve knowledge, we could potentially create thousands or millions of copies of essential information and place them in locations around the world that might survive a catastrophic event. Our understanding of the physical processes involved in catastrophic events also gives us advantages that previous civilizations lacked. We can monitor Earth's magnetic field, track geological activity, and potentially detect early warning signs of approaching catastrophes. This knowledge could allow us to take preparatory measures that might significantly improve survival rates. The development of underground facilities, hardened communication systems, and distributed resource stockpiles could provide the foundation for post-catastrophe recovery. Unlike previous civilizations that had to rely on natural caves or hastily constructed shelters, we have the engineering capability to create sophisticated underground facilities that could house large populations and preserve essential technologies through catastrophic events. Our global communication systems, while vulnerable to disruption, also offer the possibility of coordinating survival efforts on a worldwide scale. If early warning signs of an approaching catastrophe could be detected and communicated globally, it might be possible to implement coordinated preparation and survival strategies that could preserve much larger populations than in previous catastrophic cycles. The challenge lies in overcoming the psychological and political barriers to such preparation. The scale and cost of meaningful preparation for a catastrophic pole shift would be enormous, requiring unprecedented international cooperation and long-term planning. The uncertainty about timing makes it difficult to justify such massive investments, especially when the catastrophic event might not occur for thousands of years. There's also the question of whether knowledge of an approaching catastrophe would help or harm human civilization. If people believed that a catastrophic pole shift was imminent, it could lead to social breakdown, economic collapse, and conflicts over resources that might be more destructive than the catastrophe itself. The CIA's decision to classify Dr. Thomas's book may have been motivated by concerns about the social and political effects of widespread belief in imminent catastrophe. Nevertheless, there are steps that could be taken to improve humanity's chances of surviving and recovering from a catastrophic event without causing widespread panic or social disruption. The development of more resilient infrastructure, the creation of distributed knowledge preservation systems, and the cultivation of basic survival skills in the general population could all contribute to improved survival prospects. The space program offers another potential avenue for ensuring human survival. If catastrophic pole shifts are indeed inevitable on geological timescales, then establishing self-sufficient human colonies on other worlds might be the only way to guarantee the long-term survival of human civilization. While such colonies would not prevent the destruction of Earth-based civilization, they could serve as backup copies of human knowledge and culture that could eventually help rebuild civilization on Earth after the catastrophic period ended. The preservation of genetic diversity, both human and non-human, also takes on new importance in the context of cyclical catastrophes. Modern techniques for genetic storage and preservation could allow post-catastrophe civilizations to restore ecosystems and agricultural systems much more quickly than would otherwise be possible. Perhaps most importantly, our modern understanding of the scientific method and technological development could be preserved in forms that would allow post-catastrophe civilizations to rebuild much more rapidly than previous cycles. Instead of having to rediscover fundamental scientific principles through centuries of trial and error, future civilizations could have access to comprehensive scientific and technical knowledge that would allow them to quickly rebuild advanced technologies. The key insight is that while catastrophic pole shifts might be inevitable, the extent of their impact on human civilization is not predetermined. With proper preparation and knowledge preservation, it might be possible to reduce a catastrophic event from a complete civilizational collapse to a temporary setback from which humanity could recover within decades rather than millennia. This perspective suggests that rather than simply accepting the inevitability of cyclical catastrophes, modern civilization should focus on developing strategies for minimizing their impact and maximizing the chances of rapid recovery. This could involve everything from hardened infrastructure and distributed resource stockpiles to space-based backup systems and comprehensive knowledge preservation programs. The ultimate goal would be to break the cycle of catastrophic civilizational collapse and rebuild that has apparently characterized human history. If we can develop the technologies and strategies necessary to survive catastrophic events with our knowledge and capabilities intact, then future catastrophes might mark the beginning of a new phase of human development, rather than another return to the Stone Age. However, this optimistic scenario depends on our willingness to take the possibility of catastrophic pole shifts seriously and to invest in long-term survival strategies despite the uncertainty about timing. It also requires unprecedented levels of international cooperation and long-term thinking that may be difficult to achieve given current political and economic realities. The question facing our civilization is whether we will learn from the apparent lessons of previous catastrophic cycles and take steps to ensure our survival, or whether we will follow the same pattern of previous civilizations and face the next catastrophe unprepared. The answer to this question may determine not just the survival of our current civilization, but the future trajectory of human development on Earth. As we reach the end of our journey through the terrifying and fascinating world of catastrophic pole shifts, we find ourselves confronting questions that challenge everything we thought we knew about human history, our planet's stability, and our civilization's future. The evidence we've explored tonight, from Dr. Chan Thomas's classified research to the geological fingerprints of ancient catastrophes, from the buried statues of Easter Island to the mysterious erosion patterns around the Great Sphinx, paints a picture of a world that has been repeatedly reset by forces beyond human control. The theory of cyclical pole shifts forces us to reconsider our place in the grand timeline of Earth's history. If Thomas was correct, then our current technological civilization is not the pinnacle of human achievement, but rather just the latest iteration in a long series of advanced societies that have risen and fallen throughout the millennia. The cities we've built, the knowledge we've accumulated, and the technologies we've developed may all be temporary achievements, destined to be swept away by the same catastrophic forces that destroyed Atlantis, Lemuria, and countless other civilizations lost to time. Yet there is something profoundly humbling and oddly comforting about this perspective. It suggests that humanity has faced the ultimate test of survival multiple times and has always found a way to endure. The flood myths found in every culture on Earth are not just ancient stories, but testimonies to human resilience, evidence that even when faced with global catastrophes that destroy almost everything, small groups of humans have managed to survive, preserve crucial knowledge, and rebuild civilization from the ashes of the previous world. The massive stone monuments that dot our planet take on new significance when viewed through this lens. They are not just impressive architectural achievements or religious sites, but libraries of stone, repositories of essential knowledge encoded in forms designed to survive the kind of catastrophic destruction that Thomas describes. The builders of these monuments understood something that we are only beginning to grasp, that knowledge must be preserved in multiple forms and multiple locations if it is to survive the cyclical catastrophes that periodically reset human civilization. The accelerating changes we observe in Earth's magnetic field, the increasing geological instability, and the various other phenomena that could be interpreted as warning signs of an approaching catastrophe remind us that we may be living in borrowed time. Whether the next catastrophic pole shift occurs in our lifetime, in 1,000 years, or in 10,000 years, the evidence suggests that such an event is inevitable on geological timescales. This realization brings both terror and opportunity. The terror comes from understanding the sheer scale of destruction that such an event would bring, the complete obliteration of our technological civilization, the loss of billions of lives, and the reduction of the survivors to a new Stone Age. But the opportunity lies in our unprecedented ability to understand these processes, to monitor the warning signs, and potentially to prepare for such an eventuality in ways that previous civilizations never could. For the first time in human history, we have the technological capability to preserve vast amounts of knowledge in compact, durable forms. We can create multiple redundant copies of essential information and distribute them globally. We can build hardened facilities designed to survive catastrophic events. We can even establish backup copies of human civilization on other worlds, ensuring that human knowledge and culture would survive even if Earth itself became temporarily uninhabitable. More importantly, we have the scientific understanding to potentially break the cycle of catastrophic collapse and rebuilding that has apparently characterized human history. If we can develop the technologies and strategies necessary to survive catastrophic events with our knowledge and capabilities intact, then future catastrophes might mark the beginning of a new phase of human development rather than another return to primitive conditions. The challenge lies not in our technological capabilities, but in our willingness to take these possibilities seriously and to invest in long-term survival strategies despite the uncertainty about timing. The scale of preparation required would be enormous, demanding unprecedented international cooperation and long-term thinking. It would require us to look beyond the immediate concerns of politics and economics to consider the ultimate survival of human civilization itself. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Dr. Thomas's research is that survival is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable catastrophes. The fact that we exist today is proof that our ancestors survived multiple global catastrophes and managed to preserve enough knowledge and genetic diversity to rebuild advanced civilizations. This resilience suggests that even if catastrophic pole shifts are inevitable, they need not be the end of human civilization, but rather transitions between different phases of human development. The flood myths that appear in every culture on Earth end not with despair, but with hope, with the promise of renewal, of new beginnings, of the opportunity to build something better from the ruins of what came before. Noah's Ark, the survivors of Atlantis, the refugees from Lemuria, these stories all speak to the fundamental human capacity to endure, to adapt, and to rebuild. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider the possibility that you are part of a story much larger and more ancient than you ever imagined. You are a descendant of survivors, people who faced the ultimate test of human endurance and found a way to preserve the spark of civilization through the darkest of times. The knowledge you carry, the culture you participate in, and the technologies you use may all be gifts from previous civilizations, passed down through the catastrophic divide by ancestors who understood that the future of humanity depended on their ability to preserve what was most essential. Whether the next catastrophic pole shift occurs in our lifetime or in the distant future, we have the opportunity to be better ancestors than any previous generation. We can preserve more knowledge, prepare more thoroughly, and perhaps even develop the technologies necessary to prevent or mitigate such catastrophes entirely. We can be the generation that finally breaks the cycle of catastrophic collapse and rebuilding, ensuring that human civilization continues to advance, rather than repeatedly starting over from the beginning. The choice is ours. We can ignore the warnings embedded in ancient myths and geological evidence, continuing to build our civilization on the assumption that the current stability will last forever. Or we can learn from the apparent lessons of previous catastrophic cycles and take steps to ensure that humanity's future is more secure than its past. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers through time and space. May your rest be peaceful, and may your dreams carry you to worlds where humanity has learned to thrive, despite the cosmic forces that seek to reset our story. And remember that even if our current world is destined to end, the human story itself is far from over. We are part of a cycle that has repeated many times before, and will likely repeat many times again. But each iteration brings new possibilities, new knowledge, and new hope for the future of our species. The earth beneath you has shifted before and will shift again, but the human spirit that has survived every previous catastrophe continues to burn bright, carrying the light of consciousness and knowledge forward through the darkness of cosmic time. Rest well, knowing that you are part of something much larger and more enduring than any single civilization, any single catastrophe, or any single lifetime. You are part of the eternal human story of survival, adaptation, and renewal. A story that began long before recorded history and will continue long after our current chapter has ended. In the morning, the sun will rise on a world that may seem stable and permanent, but which carries within it the seeds of both destruction and renewal. How we choose to tend those seeds may determine not just our own fate, but the fate of all the generations that will come after us, carrying forward the torch of human civilization through whatever catastrophes the future may hold.